My name is Margaret Hayes. I am 78 years old, and for most of my life, I have been the quiet, loving wife of the late Robert Hayes, a man whose kindness built our fortune and whose hard work gave our children every opportunity they could ever dream of. But the night after Robert's burial, I saw the truth about the two boys I raised. My sons, Peter and Daniel, sat across from me in our dimly lit living room, their eyes hard, their voices cold. Peter leaned forward and said, "Change the will, Mom, or you'll rot under the grave like Dad." Daniel smirked as if my life was already something he owned. I sat there, hands trembling, but I didn't cry. Instead, I slid my phone under my shawl, pressed record, and waited for the lawyer to arrive the next morning. They didn't know what I was capable of. They thought I was weak. But that night, as the shadows crept across the room, I vowed to show them who their mother really was. The next morning, the house was unnaturally quiet. My sons thought I was going to break, sign over everything to them, and beg for peace. But when the lawyer knocked on the door, I took a deep breath and said, "Come in." The boys followed behind me like vultures circling their prey. As the lawyer opened his briefcase and began reading the original will, Peter interrupted, his voice loud and venomous. "Cut to the part where we get everything. She's wasting time." My heart pounded, but I smiled, clutching my shawl tighter. Inside it, my phone continued recording every word, every threat, every ugly truth they spilled. They didn't realize they were handing me the rope they'd hang themselves with. The lawyer raised an eyebrow at their outburst, but continued reading. According to Mr. Hayes's wishes, he started, only for Daniel to snatch the papers from his hands. "Rewrite it," Daniel barked. "Mom will sign whatever we tell her to sign." The audacity in his voice made my blood boil, but I stayed calm. The lawyer looked at me, clearly uneasy, but I gave him a small nod to proceed. My sons cornered me with their cruel demands, and yet I stayed seated, still recording. Little did they know I wasn't just fighting for the will. I was fighting for my dignity, my late husband's legacy, and the truth. The threats escalated. Peter slammed his fist on the table, shouting, "Change it, or you'll be buried next to Dad sooner than you think." My hands shook, not from fear, but from rage. I looked at the lawyer and said softly, "Please continue." My sons exchanged glances, not understanding why I wasn't trembling under their intimidation. They had no idea I already had a plan in motion. Every cruel word they spoke was being captured, every wicked smirk immortalized in my phone's memory. And when the time was right, that recording would burn their greedy plans to ashes. As the session ended, I acted as if they had won. I told them, "I'll think about it," just to keep them from suspecting anything. They smirked, thinking they had me cornered. But in my heart, I was already 3 steps ahead. That night, while they slept under my roof, I quietly backed up the recording to my email and to a trusted friend's phone. My sons had crossed a line, and there was no going back. They thought they could scare me into rewriting history. But they forgot one thing. I was their mother, and a mother who's been betrayed is the most dangerous person they'll ever meet. The next day, something unexpected happened. The lawyer called me privately, saying he needed to meet urgently. His voice was low and tense. "Mrs. Hayes, I believe you're in danger." My heart skipped a beat. Was he on my side, or was he warning me because something worse was coming? I packed a small bag, hid the backup of the recording in a place only I knew, and prepared myself for what might be the longest battle of my life. What happened when I stepped out of that house changed everything. If this story already has your heart racing, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. You won't want to miss what's coming. When I arrived at the lawyer's office early the next morning, the air felt heavy with tension. Mr. Jacobs, our family lawyer for over 30 years, looked at me with concern in his eyes. He closed the blinds as soon as I sat down and whispered, "Mrs. Hayes, I know your sons are pressuring you to change the will. But there's something you must know. Last night, someone broke into my office." My chest tightened. He leaned closer and said, "The only files disturbed were those concerning Robert's estate." I froze. It wasn't just greed anymore. It was desperation. They were willing to do anything to erase the truth. I told him everything about the threats, about the way they cornered me, and most importantly, about the recording. When I played it for him, his expression turned from shock to rage. "This changes everything," he said firmly. "Do not, under any circumstances, let them know you have this." I nodded, clutching my shawl as if it were my shield. Inside, fear gnawed at me, but a stronger force was rising: resolve. That night, I returned home to find Peter and Daniel waiting for me in the living room. Their expressions were icy, and Daniel asked, "Where were you, Mom?" I lied effortlessly. "Just at church, lighting a candle for your father." They exchanged a look that sent chills down my spine. They didn't believe me, but they didn't press further. Instead, Peter smiled darkly and said, "Good. Because tomorrow, we're calling another lawyer. One who understands what we want." I spent the entire night awake, listening to the creaks of the house, wondering if I'd still be alive by morning. I kept my phone under my pillow and whispered prayers into the darkness. The memories of raising those boys, of kissing their scraped knees, of holding them through nightmares, clashed with the image of the men they'd become. How had love turned into this cold greed? I vowed not to let my husband's legacy fall into their hands. The next morning, they dragged in a new lawyer, a smug young man who barely looked at me. He slid papers across the table. "Sign these, Mrs. Hayes," he said with a fake smile. My sons stood behind him like bodyguards. I took the pen but paused, my fingers trembling not from fear, but from anticipation. "What if I don't?" I asked. Daniel leaned close and hissed, "Then you'll regret it." His breath was hot against my cheek, and I felt my heart slam against my ribs. But instead of crying, I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "You have no idea what I'm capable of." They didn't know that as they threatened me, I had quietly hit record again. Every word, every threat, they were digging their own graves with their tongues. I signed nothing. Instead, I excused myself to the bathroom, slipped my phone into my pocket, and sent the new recording to Mr. Jacobs. By the time I returned, their fake lawyer was gone and they were seething. Peter spat, "You're testing us, Mom." I simply smiled and said, "I'm just thinking things through." Inside, I was trembling, but my heart felt a strange strength. The battle had just begun. Later that night, I heard footsteps outside my bedroom. My door creaked open slightly. I stayed still, clutching my phone. Through the crack, I saw Daniel's silhouette, just standing there, watching. Then he whispered, "Change the will, or we'll make sure you never wake up." He closed the door quietly, but the terror lingered. I knew then that this was no longer just about money. This was about survival. The following morning, I packed a small suitcase and told them I was visiting an old friend. They didn't stop me. They thought I was running away. But I wasn't running. I was gathering strength. As I drove to Mr. Jacobs' office, my hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. This wasn't just a fight for an inheritance. This was war. When I walked into Mr. Jacobs' office, he was already waiting with a plan. "We're going to rewrite the will," he said with a grin. "But not the way they expect. You're going to leave everything to whoever stands by you when this is over." His words lit a fire in me. For the first time in days, I felt hope. But when I returned home that evening, something was terribly wrong. The front door was wide open, and the house was eerily silent. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, calling out for my sons. There was no answer, only the sound of something dripping in the kitchen. When I walked in, I froze. On the table lay a knife and a note in Daniel's handwriting. "Sign the will tomorrow, or the next thing you see dripping will be your own blood. What happened next will chill you to your core." I stood in my kitchen, staring at that knife and the threatening note, my body trembling but my mind oddly calm. I had spent my entire life loving Peter and Daniel, giving them everything they needed to grow into strong men. But the men standing before me now, the ones who would dare threaten their own mother, were strangers. Something inside me hardened that night. I took the note, folded it neatly, and tucked it into my Bible. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was evidence. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. I brewed myself some tea, my hand steady, and waited. When Daniel and Peter finally came downstairs, their eyes were cold, their voices dripping with false sweetness. "Have you made up your mind, Mom?" Peter asked with a smirk. I looked at them calmly and said, "Yes." Their smiles widened. "Good," Daniel said, leaning against the doorframe. "Because today is your last chance." They thought they had won. They thought fear would break me. But they underestimated the strength of a mother who has nothing left to lose. I told them I'd meet their lawyer at noon. They didn't know that I had already arranged for Mr. Jacobs to bring a police officer, disguised as his assistant, to witness everything. When the clock struck 12, we all sat around the table. The fake lawyer slid the papers across to me again. "Sign here," he said. I reached for the pen, my fingers brushing the paper slowly. Then I smiled and asked, "Why is this will so different from the one my husband wrote?" The room went silent. Daniel hissed, "Just sign it, Mom." That was when Mr. Jacobs stood up and said, "Gentlemen, I suggest you choose your next words carefully." Peter shot him a glare, but before he could speak, the police officer revealed his badge. My sons froze, their faces drained of color. "Mrs. Hayes, is there something you'd like to share?" the officer asked. My heart pounded as I took my phone from my pocket, opened the recordings, and played their threats aloud. The room filled with the sound of their voices, cold, cruel, undeniable. Their faces twisted with rage and fear. "You recorded us?" Peter spat, his voice shaking with fury. Daniel slammed his hands on the table, shouting, "You think this will save you?" The officer stepped forward, hand on his holster, and said, "Sit down." My sons reluctantly obeyed, their confidence shattering. For the first time in days, I felt the power shift back to me. But the battle wasn't over. The officer explained that while the recordings were strong evidence, the threats had to be handled carefully. My sons couldn't be arrested on the spot, not yet. They were released with a warning, but the look they gave me as they left the room chilled me to the bone. They weren't finished. If anything, they were angrier than ever. That night, I locked every door and window in the house. I barely slept, my heart pounding with every sound. At one point, I heard footsteps outside my window. I grabbed the phone, ready to call the police, but the footsteps faded into the night. When I finally drifted to sleep, I dreamed of Robert, standing beside me, telling me to be strong. The next morning, I found something even more unsettling. My car tires were slashed, and a single message was scratched into the hood. "Last warning." I clutched my chest, tears welling in my eyes. They were willing to destroy everything to get what they wanted. But as fear tried to take hold, I remembered Robert's voice in my dream. "Be strong." I called Mr. Jacobs, and he told me to stay at a safe house he had arranged while he finalized the new will. He said it would be ironclad, untouchable, and ready within a week. I packed my bags quietly and slipped out before my sons woke. As I drove away in a rental car he sent, I looked back at the house that once felt like home. Now it was just a battlefield. At the safe house, I began to plan. Every day, I documented everything. Every threat, every message, every suspicious move. I sent copies to Mr. Jacobs and to a trusted friend. My sons thought they were hunting me, but I was setting the trap. Days passed, and the tension grew unbearable. Then one evening, as I sat by the window, I saw headlights approaching. My heart raced. No one was supposed to know where I was. I grabbed my phone and dialed Mr. Jacobs, but before he could answer, the lights went out. The house was plunged into darkness. I held my breath, clutching the phone, as I heard footsteps creeping closer to the door. Someone was outside, trying to break in. You won't believe what happened when that door finally opened. The door creaked open slowly, and my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. In the faint moonlight spilling through the window, I saw Daniel's silhouette step inside. Behind him, Peter followed, holding something long and metallic, an iron rod glinting in the dark. They thought they had cornered me. They thought this was the end. I stayed perfectly still, crouched behind the couch, holding my phone in one hand and the emergency flashlight in the other. "Mom," Daniel whispered, his voice cold and eerie. "We know you're here. Stop hiding. You can't win this." I bit my lip to stop it from trembling. I slowly reached up and turned on the flashlight, pointing it directly at their faces. The sudden beam startled them, but before they could react, I shouted, "The police are on their way." It was a bluff, but it bought me a few seconds. Peter growled and lunged forward, but I pressed the emergency alarm Mr. Jacobs had given me. A piercing siren filled the room, echoing into the night. My sons froze, their eyes wide, their confidence crumbling. They bolted out the door just as neighbors' lights flicked on. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and collapsed to the floor, my body shaking uncontrollably. Minutes later, the Betrayal police arrived. I showed them the slashed tires, the threatening note, and now the attempted break-in. They filed a report, but explained they needed stronger evidence to hold my sons permanently. "You have to stay somewhere secure," one officer warned. "They're not going to stop until they get what they want." I called Mr. Jacobs, my voice trembling. He insisted on moving me to an even safer location, his own guest house, surrounded by cameras and security. "Margaret," he said firmly, "you are not alone in this. We're going to end this their way." His words gave me strength, but I knew deep down that my sons wouldn't back down. They were spiraling, and desperate men are the most dangerous. Days passed, and from my safe hideout, I watched as the lawyer finalized the new will. It was brilliant, airtight, leaving everything not to Peter or Daniel, but to a charitable trust in Robert's name, with me as sole executor until my passing. If they wanted the inheritance, they'd have to go through me first. I almost smiled thinking of their faces when they learned the truth. But then, the unexpected happened. Late one night, I received a text from an unknown number. "Mom, meet us at the old cabin. No police. No lawyer. Just sign and this ends." My heart sank. The cabin they were referring to was deep in the woods, a place Robert had built years ago for family fishing trips. I hadn't been there in years. The message ended with a chilling line. "If you don't come, you won't like what happens next." I hesitated, torn between fear and anger. Then I remembered something. The safe house had a hidden camera pen that Mr. Jacobs had given me, just in case. I grabbed it, tucked it into my coat pocket, and left quietly, not telling anyone where I was going. If this was their trap, I was going to turn it against them. When I arrived at the cabin, the air was thick with dread. The place was dark except for a single lantern flickering inside. I stepped in slowly, my breath visible in the cold night air. "I'm here," I said, my voice steady. Peter stepped out of the shadows, smirking. Daniel closed the door behind me, locking it with a click. "Finally," Peter said. "Now, sign the new will, or this ends badly for you." I pulled the pen out of my pocket and looked at the papers they shoved toward me. My hands shook as I pretended to read them. Meanwhile, the pen camera was capturing every second. "You boys really want to do this?" I asked softly. Daniel snarled. "Enough talking. Sign or we'll make you." I took the papers, placed them on the table, and slowly began to sign. But before I finished, I looked up and said, "Your father would be ashamed of you." That one sentence made them snap. Peter slammed the table. Daniel cursed, and both spewed threats so vile they made my blood run cold. Every word was being recorded. When I finished my fake signature, they snatched the papers, laughing like they had won. But as I turned to leave, Daniel grabbed my arm tightly. "If you tell anyone about this, Mom, you won't live to see tomorrow." His grip was like iron, but I stared him dead in the eye and said, "You've already lost." I walked out of that cabin, my heart pounding, clutching the pen that held their downfall. The moment I reached Mr. Jacobs' house, I collapsed in tears, handing him the pen. He watched the footage and nodded. "This is it, Margaret. This is enough to bury them legally." But before we could act, they struck first. The very next day, I received a chilling package at the doorstep. Inside was a single item, my wedding photo with Robert, slashed into pieces. And a note. You have one day to change the will, or this time we won't miss. That night, I didn't sleep, because at dawn, something happened that turned this battle into an all-out war. What they did next will shock you to the core. If you're following this journey, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. At dawn, the sound of shattering glass jolted me awake. I rushed to the living room of Mr. Jacobs' guest house to find the front window smashed. On the floor, glittering in shards of broken glass, lay a rock with another note tied to it. My hands trembled as I picked it up and read the words scrawled in red ink. Last chance. Tonight, we finish this. My stomach turned. They weren't bluffing anymore. Mr. Jacobs rushed in moments later, having been woken by the alarm. He grabbed the note, his face pale. "They're escalating," he said. "We have to move quickly." He immediately called the police, but they warned that without catching them in the act, it would still be a matter of word against word until the legal process concluded. "Then we'll set the stage," I said firmly. My voice surprised even me. I was done being afraid. That afternoon, Mr. Jacobs and I hatched a plan. We would let my sons think I was giving in, lure them into a meeting, and have the authorities ready to catch them red-handed. "Margaret," Mr. Jacobs said gently, "are you sure you can handle this?" I looked at him with a resolve I hadn't felt in years. "I've handled worse. I buried my husband. I can handle 2 greedy boys." As evening approached, I sent them a message from an untraceable phone Mr. Jacobs provided. "Meet me at the family house at midnight. I'll sign everything over." The reply came within minutes. "Good choice, Mom." My heart ached at those words, not because they scared me, but because they reminded me of the boys I once loved. When the clock struck midnight, I sat in the living room of our old house, the papers they demanded lying on the table. Hidden cameras captured every angle. My hands shook slightly, but my heart burned with determination. I thought of Robert, of his voice telling me to stand tall. This was for him. The door slammed open, and in they came, Peter and Daniel, their eyes gleaming with triumph. Daniel sneered, "About time you came to your senses." Peter closed the door behind them, locking it. They didn't notice the tiny red recording light in the corner of the room. "Where are the papers?" Daniel barked. I slid the documents across the table, keeping my voice calm. "Right here," I said. They lunged for them, scanning greedily. "Sign," Peter ordered, shoving a pen into my hand. I sat down, but instead of signing, I looked up at them and said, "Do you remember the promise you made to your father? To protect me no matter what." For a moment, their faces softened, then hardened again. "That was before we realized you were standing in our way." Daniel spat. They began hurling insults, threats, and every venomous word they could muster. And the cameras caught it all. My heart pounded with every second, knowing justice was recording itself right before my eyes. I signed a fake signature just as we had planned. They snatched the papers and laughed, hugging each other like victorious thieves. "See, Mom? That wasn't so hard," Peter mocked. I stood up slowly, staring them down, and said, "You have no idea what you've just done." Suddenly, red and blue lights flashed through the windows. My sons froze. The front door burst open, and police officers stormed in. "Hands up," one officer shouted. Peter and Daniel dropped the papers, their faces ashen. "What is this?" Daniel yelled. The officers didn't answer. They slapped cuffs on both of them as the cameras continued to roll. As they were dragged out, Peter screamed, "You set us up. You're no mother. You're a snake." I walked to the doorway, my face calm, and said, "No, I'm a mother who finally protected her family's legacy." The officers took them away, but my victory was bittersweet. Watching them in handcuffs tore a piece of my heart out. They were my sons, but they had turned into something unrecognizable. That night, I sat alone in the house, staring at the broken picture of my wedding that they had destroyed. I glued it back together piece by piece, tears running down my face. For the first time in years, I felt Robert's presence beside me, whispering, "You did well, Margaret." But the battle wasn't over. The next morning, I got a call from the county jail. The officer said, Mrs. Hayes, your sons made bail." My hand tightened around the phone. They were free, and their fury would be greater than ever. I hung up and stared out the window, my reflection staring back at me. I knew they would come again. I knew this wasn't finished. And as I watched the sun rise, I whispered to myself, if they want a war, they'll get one. What they did next shook my world to its core and pushed me to the edge of my limits. The days after my sons were released on bail were filled with an eerie calm. I knew it was only the eye of the storm. Every creak of the house, every car that passed by, set my nerves on edge. I could feel their rage in the air, like a storm cloud hovering above me. I didn't have to wait long for them to strike. On the third night, as I sat sipping tea in Mr. Jacobs' guest house, the lights suddenly went out. Total darkness swallowed the room. My heart pounded as I grabbed the emergency flashlight and slowly walked toward the window. In the distance, I could see the faint glow of headlights, 2 cars parked at the edge of the property. My breath caught. They had found me again. I quickly dialed Mr. Jacobs, whispering, "They're here." His voice was urgent. "Stay inside, Margaret. The security system will alert the police. I'm on my way." But as I hung up, I heard the back door creak open. My pulse raced. I crouched behind the kitchen counter, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate, predatory. Then, Daniel's voice sliced through the darkness, low and menacing. "Mom, come out. We're not here to hurt you yet." I stayed silent, my heart drumming in my ears. Peter's voice followed, mocking and cold. "We just want to talk, right, Daniel?" I inched backward slowly, but my foot hit a loose floorboard, and the creak gave me away. "There you are," Daniel hissed. They moved toward me, their shadows stretching across the walls. Just as Daniel reached the counter, the piercing wail of the security alarm exploded, bathing the room in flashing red light. The boys cursed and bolted for the back door, disappearing into the night just as police sirens approached. The officers combed the property, but found nothing except muddy footprints and a message scrawled on the back fence in spray paint: "You can't hide forever." The officers increased surveillance, but I knew my sons were becoming more reckless, more dangerous. They had nothing left to lose. The next morning, Mr. Jacobs arrived with new documents. "Margaret," he said, his voice firm, "we finalized the will today. Once this is filed, it's untouchable. They can't contest it, but we need to move fast before they try something else." I nodded, clutching the pen like a lifeline. With a steady hand, I signed the final version of the will. It was done. The fortune was secured, not for their greed, but for good causes and people who truly needed it. That night, I allowed myself to rest. But peace was a luxury I couldn't afford. Around midnight, I was awakened by the smell of smoke. Panic shot through me as I rushed to the window. Flames were licking the edges of the guest house roof. My sons had set the house on fire. I grabbed my phone, called 911, and ran to the back door, choking on the thick smoke. As I stumbled into the yard, coughing and trembling, I saw them standing by the fence, watching the flames with cold satisfaction. Daniel shouted, "Sign it over, or next time you won't make it out." Then they vanished into the darkness. Moments later, firefighters arrived and doused the flames, but the damage was done. My safe house was gone. The police finally issued warrants for their arrest, citing arson and attempted murder. But catching them was another matter. They had gone into hiding. 4 days, I moved from one secure location to another, always looking over my shoulder. Fear threatened to consume me, but so did anger. I refused to let them win. Meanwhile, Mr. Jacobs took the recordings, the threats, and the new will to court. The case began to gain attention. News outlets started covering the story of the elderly widow fighting against her own sons. Public sympathy poured in, and that only made my sons angrier. I began receiving anonymous calls at odd hours, heavy breathing, whispered threats. They wanted me to break. Then, one evening, I received an unexpected call from Daniel. His voice was trembling, but not with fear, with rage. "You think you're smart, Mom? You think you can humiliate us in front of the world? You've made this war, and we'll finish it. Before I could respond, he hung up. I sat there in the dark, clutching the phone, my heart pounding. I knew they were planning something final, something deadly. I could feel it. I called Mr. Jacobs, who reassured me that the police were on high alert. But I had the sinking feeling that when the final confrontation came, it would be me and them. Face to face, no one else. 2 days later, that confrontation arrived sooner than I expected. Late at night, as I prepared to leave yet another safe location, the power went out. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Time's up. Meet us where it all began, the cemetery, or we'll burn everything you love to the ground. I knew what they meant. They were summoning me to Robert's grave. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, driving into the night toward the cemetery where it all started. The moon was full, casting eerie shadows on the gravestones. When I arrived, they were waiting, Peter with a crowbar, Daniel with a shovel. They stood over Robert's grave like vultures, their faces twisted with fury. "Change the will, Mom," Peter snarled, stepping closer. Daniel slammed the shovel into the dirt, the sound echoing in the cold night. "Or rotten under the grave with him." The final battle had begun. What happened at that cemetery will make your heart stop. The moonlight cast an eerie glow over the cemetery, and the wind howled like it knew a storm of evil was about to break loose. I stepped out of the car slowly, my eyes fixed on my son standing by Robert's grave. The dirt was disturbed, as if they had already begun digging. My heart raced, but my face showed no fear. Peter gripped the crowbar tighter, stepping toward me. "This is your last chance, Mom," he hissed. "Sign the will, or you'll be sleeping 6 feet under with Dad tonight." Daniel sneered, slamming the shovel into the ground. "You're old, weak. No one will even miss you when you're gone." Their voices dripped with venom, but I stood my ground. I took a slow step forward, my hands hidden inside my coat pockets. Inside one of them, I was clutching the small camera pen Mr. Jacobs had given me again, already recording. "You think you scare me?" I said calmly, my voice steady as stone. "You boys have already killed the mother who raised you. What's left is someone who will fight to her last breath." Peter laughed darkly. "Then let's see how long that breath lasts." He lunged toward me with a crowbar, but I sidestepped, stumbling slightly. Daniel moved in to block my path, waving the shovel like a weapon. "Sign it now," he shouted, throwing the papers at my feet. The wind blew them across the graves, scattering them like fallen leaves. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You want the truth?" I said, raising my voice so it echoed across the silent cemetery. "I already changed the will, and it's ironclad. Even if you kill me, you'll never see a penny." Their faces twisted with rage, their bodies trembling with fury. Peter roared and swung the crowbar, but before it could reach me, headlights blazed through the cemetery. Sirens wailed. Police cars screeched to a stop, and officers jumped out with guns drawn. "Drop the weapons," they shouted. My sons froze, caught like wild animals in a trap. But instead of surrendering, Daniel screamed, "You set us up again," and charged toward me. The officers fired a warning shot into the air, and he stumbled back. Peter dropped the crowbar and raised his hands, but his eyes burned with hate. "You'll regret this, Mom," he spat through clenched teeth. The officers rushed in, pinning them to the ground, handcuffing them as they screamed and cursed. As they were dragged toward the police cars, I took a shaky step toward them and said softly, "You regret only when it's too late." Daniel spat at the ground, thrashing like a madman, while Peter simply glared at me, his eyes cold and lifeless. The officers escorted me to safety, but my legs felt like jelly. I looked back at Robert's grave, tears streaming down my face. "I did it, Robert," I whispered. "I protected what we built." But my relief was short-lived. The next morning, I received a call from the sheriff. "Mrs. Hayes, they're being held without bail this time." But his voice hesitated. "They're not talking. They're plotting something. They told one of the inmates that this isn't over, that they'll make sure you pay even from behind bars." A chill ran down my spine. Even locked away, they were dangerous. I stayed under police protection, but my nights were restless, haunted by the image of my sons glaring at me from the back of that police car. Meanwhile, news of the cemetery confrontation spread like wildfire. Reporters camped outside the courthouse during the preliminary hearings. The public was outraged, rallying behind me. How could children do this to their own mother? Strangers whispered in shock. The court date was set, and I knew this trial would determine everything: my safety, my future, my husband's legacy. Mr. Jacobs assured me, "We have all the evidence. The recordings, the threats, the footage from the cemetery. It's enough to bury them legally." I nodded, but my heart ached. I wasn't celebrating victory. I was grieving the loss of my sons to greed and hatred. The day before the trial, a package arrived at my door. No name, no address. Inside was a single photo: me, standing at Robert's grave the night of the attack. Written across it in red ink were the words, "See you in court. See you in hell." That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me jump. I prayed harder than I ever had in my life, asking for strength to face what was coming. When the morning sun rose, I dressed in black, not for mourning, but for battle. This trial would be the ultimate test. If they were found guilty, they'd finally pay for everything. But if they somehow managed to twist the story, I could lose everything. As I stepped into the courthouse, the world seemed to hold its breath. The courtroom was packed, the air electric with tension. My sons were let in, wearing prison jumpsuits, their faces cold and defiant. They stared at me, unblinking, as if daring me to speak. When I took the stand, the judge asked me to tell my story. I opened my mouth, and with a voice that trembled only for a moment, I began to recount everything. Every threat, every attack, every night of fear. The recordings were played, the videos shown. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as my son's cruelty was exposed. But just when I thought the truth was enough to end it all, Daniel leaned forward with a sinister smile and said, "You think this is over, Mom? The trial is just the beginning." What he revealed next in that courtroom stunned everyone and nearly shattered me. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as Daniel leaned forward, his shackled hands resting on the table. His smirk sent chills down my spine. "Tell them, Mom," he said loudly, his voice dripping with venom. "Tell them about the other will." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The judge slammed the gavel. "Order in the court." I froze. Another will? My heart pounded. He was bluffing, he had to be. But then he laughed, a sound so cold it twisted my stomach. "That's right. Dad made a second will. The one you don't want anyone to know about. The one that leaves everything to us." The courtroom erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered frantically. My lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, rose to his feet. "Your Honor, this is a desperate fabrication. There is no such document." Daniel chuckled and glanced at Peter, who smirked back. "We have a copy. Hidden somewhere you'll never find it. Unless," he turned his gaze to me, "you drop these charges." I gripped the edge of my seat, fighting to steady my breathing. Was it a lie, or had Robert truly made a second will in his final days? My mind raced back to those last nights before he passed, the hushed conversations he had with our old friend Gerald, the sealed envelope I once saw in his drawer but never opened. Could it be true? Mr. Jacobs whispered to me, "Stay calm. Even if a document surfaces, it must be authenticated." But my sons weren't done. Peter stood up, despite the officers trying to restrain him. "You've painted us as monsters, Mom. But what if the world finds out you hid Dad's real wishes? You'll lose everything, and everyone will know what kind of liar you are." Gasps echoed again. My heart ached, not from fear of losing the estate, but from the venom dripping from the mouths of the children I once rocked to sleep. "You're lying," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "Your father loved me. He would never betray me." Daniel sneered. "Oh, he loved you. He just didn't trust you." The judge ordered a recess, and chaos erupted in the courtroom. Reporters swarmed the hall, shouting questions. Inside a side room, Mr. Jacobs looked at me with concern. "Margaret, We need to prepare for the possibility they've forged something. If they do, we'll expose it, but they're trying to rattle you. Don't let them see you break." I nodded, though my hands were shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts spiraled. Could Robert have left something behind that I never knew about? Or was this just another one of their traps? At 3 a.m., I found myself sifting through old letters and papers, desperate for answers. My fingers brushed against a sealed envelope hidden inside an old photo album. My breath caught. It was addressed to me, in Robert's handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a letter. "My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, then you are stronger than I ever imagined. There is only one will, the one I left with Jacobs. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. And never let our sons destroy what we built. Protect it, protect yourself. Love always, Robert." Tears blurred my vision as I clutched the letter to my chest. Relief washed over me, but only for a moment. Because in the morning, I knew Daniel and Peter would try something drastic. They were cornered animals, and cornered animals bite. The next day in court, they produced a document, weathered, stamped, looking eerily authentic. The courtroom gasped as they placed it on the judge's desk. "This," Daniel said proudly, "is the real will." Mr. Jacobs snatched it and scanned it quickly. "Forgery," he muttered. He stood and said aloud, "Your Honor, this document is a clear fake. The signatures are inconsistent, and the notary seal is outdated by years." The judge examined it, frowning. "We will have it analyzed by a handwriting expert." Daniel's smirk faltered, but only slightly. They still believed they could win. Then it was my turn to speak. I rose, holding Robert's letter with trembling hands. "Your Honor, I have here a personal letter from my late husband, confirming there was never another will. This is his handwriting, his seal, and his words." I read the letter aloud. The courtroom went silent except for my voice. For the first time, I saw Peter's face crumble, his arrogance cracking. Daniel, however, glared at me with pure hatred. "You think this letter saves you? This isn't over," he growled as the officers restrained him. The judge, clearly angered, ordered the document into evidence and postponed the trial to allow a forensic investigation. As we left the courtroom, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. I held my head high, but inside, I was trembling. I had won a small battle, but the war was far from over. That night, under police protection, I tried to rest. But at midnight, a Molotov cocktail shattered the window of the place I was staying. Flames erupted, and I barely escaped with my life. The police caught a masked man fleeing the scene, an accomplice hired by my sons. Under questioning, he revealed their plan: to eliminate me before the final trial date. The police transferred me to a secure safe house with armed guards. Mr. Jacobs told me, "Margaret, we're almost at the end. Just hold on. They can't run forever." I clung to his words, but fear still gnawed at me. The next morning, as I looked out at the sunrise from my safe house window, I knew the final confrontation was coming. The trial would resume in 2 days, and it would decide everything: my freedom, my safety, and my husband's legacy. What happened in that courtroom on the final day would shock the world and change my life forever. The climax is near, and you won't believe how this ends. If this story has your heart racing, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. The final day of the trial dawned gray and heavy, as though the sky itself anticipated the storm about to unfold. I dressed slowly, choosing the same black dress I wore to Robert's funeral, a reminder of my strength. When the police arrived to escort me to the courthouse, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Fear had burned away, leaving only steel. As I entered the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Reporters filled every seat, cameras flashed like lightning, and whispers echoed through the gallery. My sons were brought in, their hands cuffed, their faces masks of defiance. Peter avoided my eyes, but Daniel stared straight at me, his glare sharp enough to cut glass. The judge entered, and silence fell. "We will now hear the final testimonies and examine the evidence," he said firmly. Mr. Jacobs rose, presenting every recording, every threat, every video from the cemetery and safe house. The jury watched, horrified, as my son's own words condemned them. Murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd with each clip played. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, my hands gripping the stand. My voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. I told them about the night Robert died, the promises he made me keep, and the terror I lived through at the hands of my own children. They are my flesh and blood, I said, tears streaming down my face, but they tried to bury me alive, literally and figuratively. This isn't just about money. It's about survival. It's about justice. The courtroom was silent when I finished. Even some of the jurors looked like they were holding back tears. Then it was Daniel's turn. He leaned forward, his voice venomous. "She's lying. She's turning you all against us. My father trusted me. He left me everything, and she stole it. She forged the letter." He slammed his fist on the table, his chains rattling. "She's the criminal here, not us." The judge warned him to control himself, but he ignored it. "You think you can lock us away?" Daniel spat. "We have people on the outside. Even if you cage us, we'll finish this." His words sent a chill through the room. Peter, quieter but no less bitter, muttered, "You'll regret this, Mom. You'll die alone." Then came the twist no one saw coming. As the handwriting expert testified, he revealed something shocking. The so-called second will was not only forged, but it had fingerprints on it belonging to a man named Gerald, Robert's old friend. Gasps filled the courtroom. The officers brought in Gerald, who had been detained earlier that morning. Under questioning, he cracked. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he sobbed. "They paid me to fake the document. They promised me a cut. I thought it was just about money, not this." He pointed at my sons, his voice shaking. "They threatened to kill me if I didn't help." The courtroom exploded with chaos. The judge slammed the gavel repeatedly. My sons cursed Gerald, calling him a traitor, while the officers restrained them. Mr. Jacobs seized the moment. "Your Honor, this confirms everything. This was a calculated attempt to defraud and murder Mrs. Hayes." The jury didn't need long. After deliberation, they returned with their verdict. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, arson, fraud, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced Peter and Daniel to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Daniel screamed, "This isn't over." Peter simply slumped in his chair, his face pale. I sat there, tears streaming down my cheeks, not from joy, but from the ache of losing them forever. They were my sons, but they had chosen a path I couldn't follow. As they were led away, Daniel twisted back, shouting, "We'll get you, even from hell." His voice echoed as the doors closed behind him. The courtroom fell silent. After the verdict, reporters swarmed me. "Mrs. Hayes, how do you feel?" one asked. I wiped my tears and said softly, "I don't feel victorious. I feel free, but also heartbroken." No mother dreams of seeing her sons in chains. That night, back at my house, the house that had once been filled with laughter, I sat by Robert's photo, the glued-together frame resting on the table. "It's over," I whispered. "We won, my love." But as I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A distorted voice whispered, "It's not over. Watch your back." My blood ran cold. They were behind bars, yet the threat felt real. I clutched my phone, my heart pounding. Could they still reach me? Were there others involved? I closed my eyes, vowing to stay strong. But in the darkness, one thought haunted me. Was this really the end? Or just another beginning? The night after the trial felt different. The air outside was crisp, almost too still, as if the world was holding its breath. For the first time in months, I should have been able to sleep peacefully. Yet I lay awake, my heart pounding at every creak in the house. Daniel's last words echoed in my mind like a curse. "We'll get you, even from hell." I checked every door and window twice before crawling into bed. At some point, exhaustion took me, and I drifted into a restless sleep. I dreamed of Robert, standing in the cemetery under a full moon. "It's almost over, Margaret," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But you must finish what you started. Only then will you be free." I woke with a start, sweat dripping down my forehead. The next morning, Mr. Jacobs called. "Margaret," he said, "I have good news. The will has been filed, and the court's decision is final. Everything is safe now." Relief washed over me, but only for a moment. Then he added, "But the police intercepted a message from Daniel. He has connections, people willing to do his bidding on the outside. You must remain vigilant." My heart sank. Even from prison, they had found a way to reach me. That evening, as I prepared dinner, a loud knock rattled the front door. My body froze. Slowly, I approached, gripping a kitchen knife tightly. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. A familiar voice answered. "It's Gerald. Please, open up." I hesitated. Gerald was the man who had confessed in court, the one who helped expose my son's crimes. Carefully, I unlocked the door, but kept the chain on. He stood there, pale and shaking. "They're after me," he said, his voice cracking. "They sent someone." I barely escaped. He handed me a flash drive. "Everything you need to end this completely is on here. Their contacts, their plans, everything." Before I could ask more, a car screeched to a halt at the end of the driveway. My blood ran cold. 2 masked men jumped out, charging toward us. I slammed the door shut and locked it just as they reached the porch. The windows rattled as they pounded on them, shouting threats. Gerald and I scrambled to the back of the house. I hit the panic button on the security system, and alarms blared. The attackers tried to break in, but flashing police lights appeared in the distance. The men fled, vanishing into the night. When the police arrived, they found tire tracks and a discarded burner phone. Inside the phone were chilling messages. "Finish it. She dies tonight." The authorities tightened my security, placing patrols around my property. They traced the burner phone back to an inmate working with Daniel. That was the final straw. The prison moved both my sons to solitary confinement, cutting them off from outside contact. For the first time, I felt the grip of fear loosen from my chest. Days later, I sat in Mr. Jacobs' office as he showed me what was on Gerald's flash drive. It was worse than I imagined. Lists of people they had bribed, plans to forge more documents, even a discussion about taking over the trust fund through shell companies. But there was also something else, videos. Videos of my sons plotting my death, laughing about it. We handed everything to the authorities. The case went federal. My sons were hit with new charges that ensured they would never see freedom again. As the judge delivered their final sentences, life in a maximum security facility with no chance of release, I felt a bittersweet relief wash over me. Weeks passed. Slowly, life began to return to some form of normalcy. The house was repaired, the broken windows replaced, the walls repainted. I planted flowers around Robert's grave, whispering to him about everything that had happened. "It's over now," I told him softly. "They can't hurt us anymore." That night, as the sun set over the horizon, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the fireflies dance. The world felt peaceful again. For the first time in a long while, I smiled without fear. Still, deep down, I knew scars remained. Emotional scars that would never fully fade. But I had survived. I had fought back. And I had won. I learned something powerful through this storm. Sometimes, strength isn't about being unafraid. It's about standing tall even when fear claws at your heart. My sons chose greed and hate, and it destroyed them. I chose love, resilience, and truth, and it saved me. So to everyone listening to my story, never let anyone, not even those closest to you, take away your dignity. Stand firm, fight back, and never, ever underestimate the strength of a heart that refuses to break. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story touched you, like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice matters, and your story can inspire others, just like mine.